Welcome to the channel Next Gen Tech Prep. In today's video, we are diving deep into essential questions and comprehensive answers for the Microsoft Fabric Analytics Engineer Associate certification. Whether you're preparing for an exam or just looking to sharpen your knowledge, you're in the right place. If you find this content valuable, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Now, let's get started.
You have a Fabric tenant that contains a lakehouse named Lakehouse 1. Lakehouse 1 contains a Delta table named Customer. When you query Customer, you discover that the query is slow to execute. You suspect that maintenance was not performed on the table. You need to identify whether maintenance tasks were performed on Customer. Solution: you run the following Spark SQL statement: refresh table Customer. Does this meet the goal? The options are: Option A, yes. Option B, no.
To arrive at the correct answer, we focus on the keywords, identify whether maintenance tasks were performed, Delta table, refresh table.
The correct answer is option B, no.
Why is this correct? B. Running refresh table Customer only invalidates and reloads the cached metadata of the table. It does not provide any information or history regarding whether maintenance tasks, such as optimize or vacuum, have been performed on the Delta table. Why are the others incorrect? A. This option is incorrect because refresh table does not return the transaction history or maintenance logs of a Delta table. To view maintenance history, you must use describe history Customer instead.
You have a Fabric tenant that contains a lakehouse named Lakehouse 1. Lakehouse 1 contains a Delta table named Customer. When you query Customer, you discover that the query is slow to execute. You suspect that maintenance was not performed on the table. You need to identify whether maintenance tasks were performed on Customer. Solution: you run the following Spark SQL statement: explain table Customer. Does this meet the goal? The options are: Option A, yes. Option B, no.
To arrive at the correct answer, we focus on the keywords, Delta table maintenance, identify whether maintenance tasks were performed, explain table, Spark SQL.
The correct answer is option B, no.
Why is this correct? B. The explain statement displays the execution plan of a query rather than the history of maintenance operations. To check if maintenance tasks like optimize or vacuum were performed on a Delta table, you must use describe history. Why are the others incorrect? A. This option is incorrect because explain table does not show the history of maintenance tasks performed on the table, meaning the proposed solution fails to meet the goal.
You have an Azure Repos repository named Repo1 and a Fabric-enabled Microsoft Power BI Premium capacity. The capacity contains two workspaces named Workspace 1 and Workspace 2. Git integration is enabled at the workspace level. You plan to use Microsoft Power BI Desktop and Workspace 1 to make version-controlled changes to a semantic model stored in Repo 1. The changes will be built and deployed to Workspace 2 by using Azure pipelines. You need to ensure that report and semantic model definitions are saved as individual text files in a folder hierarchy. The solution must minimize development and maintenance effort. In which file format should you save the changes? The options are: Option A, PBIP. Option B, BIDS. Option C, PBIT. Option D, PBIX.
To arrive at the correct answer, we focus on the keywords, Git integration, individual text files in a folder hierarchy, version-controlled changes, semantic model definitions.
The correct answer is option A, PBIP.
Why is this correct? A. PBIP, Power BI project, format saves report and semantic model definitions as plain text files in a structured folder hierarchy, which is natively supported by Git integration and Azure pipelines for version control and deployment. Why are the others incorrect? B. BIDS files only store data source connection settings to help users quickly connect to data, rather than containing full report and semantic model definitions. C. PBIT files are binary template files that contain the report structure and schema but do not save definitions as individual text files in a folder hierarchy. D. PBIX files are single binary files containing both data and definitions, which cannot be easily tracked at a granular level in Git or saved as individual text files.
You have a Fabric workspace named Workspace 1 that contains a lakehouse named Lakehouse 1. In Workspace 1, you create a data pipeline named Pipeline 1. You have CSV files stored in an Azure Storage account. You need to add an activity to Pipeline 1 that will copy data from the CSV files to Lakehouse 1. The activity must support Power Query M formula language expressions. Which type of activity should you add? The options are Option A, Data Flow. Option B, Notebook. Option C, Script. Option D, Copy Data.
To arrive at the correct answer, we focus on the keywords Power Query M formula language expressions, copy data from the CSV files to Lakehouse 1, activity to Pipeline 1.
The correct answer is option A, data flow.
Why is this correct? A. Dataflow, specifically Dataflow Gen 2 in Microsoft Fabric, is built on Power Query, which natively uses the Power Query M formula language to connect, transform, and load data into destinations like Lakehouse 1. Why are the others incorrect? B. Notebook activities in Fabric run Spark jobs using languages like PySpark, Scala, SQL, or SparkR, and do not support Power Query M formula language expressions. C. Script activities are designed to execute SQL queries or commands against database engines and do not support Power Query M formula language expressions. D. Copy data activities are optimized for high-throughput data ingestion and movement, but they do not support Power Query M formula language expressions for data transformation.
You have a Fabric tenant that contains a lakehouse. You plan to use a visual query to merge two tables. You need to ensure that the query returns all the rows in both tables. Which type of join should you use? The options are Option A, Inner. Option B, Full Outer. Option C, Left Outer. Option D, Right Anti. Option E, Right Outer. Option F, Left Anti.
To arrive at the correct answer, we focus on the keywords merge two tables, returns all the rows in both tables.
The correct answer is option B, full outer.
Why is this correct? B. A full outer join retains all rows from both the left and right tables, regardless of whether they have matching values. Why are the others incorrect? A. An inner join only returns rows with matching values in both tables, omitting non-matching rows. C. A left outer join returns all rows from the left table but only matching rows from the right table. D. A right anti-join returns only rows from the right table that have no matching rows in the left table. E. A right outer join returns all rows from the right table but only matching rows from the left table. F. A left anti-join returns only rows from the left table that have no matching rows in the right table.
You have a Fabric tenant that contains a lakehouse named Lakehouse 1. Lakehouse 1 contains a delta table that has 1 million Parquet files. You need to remove files that were not referenced by the table during the past 30 days. The solution must ensure that the transaction log remains consistent and the ACID properties of the table are maintained. What should you do? The options are Option A, from OneLake File Explorer, delete the files. Option B, run the optimize command and specify the zorder parameter. Option C, run the optimize command and specify the vorder parameter. Option D, run the vacuum command.
To arrive at the correct answer, we focus on the keywords remove files that were not referenced, past 30 days, delta table, transaction log remains consistent, ACID properties.
The correct answer is option D, run the vacuum command.
Why is this correct? D. The vacuum command cleans up a delta table by recursively vacuuming directories associated with the table and removing data files that are no longer in the latest state of the transaction log and are older than a retention threshold. Why are the others incorrect? A. Deleting files directly from OneLake File Explorer bypasses the Delta Lake transaction log, which corrupts the table and violates ACID properties. B. The optimize command with zorder is used to reorganize data to improve query performance through multi-dimensional clustering, not to delete unreferenced historical files. C. The optimize command with vorder is a fabric-specific optimization that applies sorting and compression to improve read performance, but it does not purge unreferenced files.
You have a Fabric workspace named Workspace 1 and an Azure SQL database. You plan to create a data flow that will read data from the database, and then transform the data by performing an inner join. You need to ignore spaces in the values when performing the inner join. The solution must minimize development effort. What should you do? The options are: Option A, append the queries by using fuzzy matching. Option B, merge the queries by using fuzzy matching. Option C, append the queries by using a lookup table. Option D, merge the queries by using a lookup table.
To arrive at the correct answer, we focus on the keywords: inner join, ignore spaces, minimize development effort, data flow.
The correct answer is option B, merge the queries by using fuzzy matching.
Why is this correct? B. Merging queries in Power Query performs a join operation. Enabling fuzzy matching within the merge settings allows you to ignore spaces in the matching columns with minimal development effort, avoiding the need for manual text transformation steps. Why are the others incorrect? A. Appending queries is used to combine rows from multiple tables, union operation, rather than performing a join, and fuzzy matching is not applicable to append operations. C. Appending queries performs a union operation, not a join, and using a lookup table requires additional development effort to create and maintain. D. While merging performs a join, using a lookup table to handle spaces requires extra development effort compared to simply enabling the built-in fuzzy matching option.
You have a Fabric tenant that contains a warehouse named Warehouse 1. Warehouse 1 contains two schemas named Schema 1 and Schema 2 and a table named Schema 1. City. You need to make a copy of Schema 1. City in Schema 2. The solution must minimize the copying of data. Which T-SQL statement should you run? The options are: Option A, insert into Schema 2. City select asterisk from Schema 1. City. Option B, select asterisk into Schema 2. City from Schema 1. City. Option C, create table Schema 2. City AS clone of Schema 1. City. Option D, create table Schema 2. City AS select asterisk from Schema 1. City.
To arrive at the correct answer, we focus on the keywords: Fabric tenant, warehouse, minimize the copying of data, copy of Schema 1.city in Schema 2.
The correct answer is option C, create table Schema 2. City AS clone of Schema 1. City.
Why is this correct? C. In Microsoft Fabric Synapse Data Warehouse, create table AS clone of creates a zero-copy clone of a table. This only copies the metadata and points to the same underlying Parquet files in OneLake, minimizing data copying. Why are the others incorrect? A. Insert into requires the destination table to already exist and physically copies all data rows, which does not minimize data copying. B. Select asterisk into is not supported in Fabric Synapse Data Warehouse for creating new tables and would physically copy data if it were. D. Create table AS select, CTAS, physically copies all the data from the source table to a new table, which does not minimize data copying.
You have a Fabric tenant that contains a lakehouse named Lakehouse 1. You need to prevent new tables added to Lakehouse 1 from being added automatically to the default semantic model of the Lakehouse. What should you configure? The options are: Option A, the SQL Analytics endpoint settings. Option B, the semantic model settings. Option C, the workspace settings. Option D, the Lakehouse 1 settings.
To arrive at the correct answer, we focus on the keywords: prevent new tables, added automatically, default semantic model, Lakehouse.
The correct answer is option A, the SQL Analytics endpoint settings.
Why is this correct? A. The setting to automatically sync and add new tables or views to the default semantic model is configured within the SQL Analytics endpoint settings of the Lakehouse. Why are the others incorrect? B. The semantic model settings configure properties like scheduled refresh and credentials, but they do not control the automatic ingestion of new Lakehouse tables. C. Workspace settings apply to the entire workspace and do not contain the specific toggle for automatic table synchronization of an individual Lakehouse's default semantic model. D. Lakehouse settings manage general properties and configurations, but the specific control for default semantic model table inclusion is located in the SQL Analytics endpoint settings.
You have a Fabric tenant. You are creating an Azure Data Factory pipeline. You have a stored procedure that returns the number of active customers and their average sales for the current month. You need to add an activity that will execute the stored procedure in a warehouse. The returned values must be available to the downstream activities of the pipeline. Which type of activity should you add? The options are: Option A, switch. Option B, copy data. Option C, append variable. Option D, lookup.
To arrive at the correct answer, we focus on the keywords: execute the stored procedure, returned values must be available to the downstream activities, warehouse.
The correct answer is option D, lookup.
Why is this correct? D. The lookup activity can execute a stored procedure in a data warehouse and return the resulting dataset, making the returned values available as output for downstream activities in the pipeline. Why are the others incorrect? A. The switch activity is a control flow activity used to evaluate a set of cases, not to execute stored procedures or retrieve data. B. The copy data activity is designed to copy data between a source and a sink, rather than returning query or stored procedure results directly to downstream pipeline activities. C. The append variable activity is used to append a value to an existing array variable defined in the pipeline, not to execute a stored procedure.
You have a Fabric tenant that contains two workspaces named Workspace 1 and Workspace 2. Workspace 1 contains a lakehouse named Lakehouse 1. Workspace 2 contains a lakehouse named Lakehouse 2. Lakehouse 1 contains a table named DBO Sales. Lakehouse 2 contains a table named DBO Customers. You need to ensure that you can write queries that reference both DBO Sales and DBO Customers in the same SQL query without making additional copies of the tables. What should you use? The options are: Option A, a shortcut. Option B, a data flow. Option C, a view. Option D, a managed table.
To arrive at the correct answer, we focus on the keywords: two workspaces, reference both DBO Sales and DBO Customers in the same SQL query, without making additional copies.
The correct answer is option A, a shortcut.
Why is this correct? A. Shortcuts in Microsoft Fabric allow you to reference data from another lakehouse or workspace without copying the underlying data, enabling you to query both tables together in the same SQL query. Why are the others incorrect? B. Data flows are used to ingest and transform data, which would physically copy and duplicate the data into the destination lakehouse, violating the requirement to avoid making additional copies. C. A SQL view cannot directly query tables across different Fabric lakehouses or workspaces unless a shortcut is first created to make the external table accessible within the same SQL endpoint. D. A managed table physically stores data in the lakehouse's managed storage, which would require copying the data from the other lakehouse and creating a duplicate.
You have a fabric tenant that contains a warehouse. You are designing a star schema model that will contain a customer dimension. The customer dimension table will be a Type 2 slowly changing dimension, SCD. You need to recommend which columns to add to the table. The columns must not already exist in the source. Which 3 types of columns should you recommend? Each correct answer presents part of the solution. The options are: Option A, a foreign key. Option B, a natural key. Option C, an effective end date and time. Option D, a surrogate key. Option E, an effective start date and time.
To arrive at the correct answer, we focus on the keywords, Type 2 slowly changing dimension, SCD, columns must not already exist in the source, customer dimension.
The correct answers are Option C, an effective end date and time, and Option D, a surrogate key, and Option E, an effective start date and time.
Why is this correct? C, an effective end date and time is required in Type 2 SCDs to track when a specific version of a record became inactive. D, a surrogate key is a unique identifier generated for the dimension table to distinguish between multiple versions of the same natural key. E, an effective start date and time is required in Type 2 SCDs to track when a specific version of a record became active. Why are the others incorrect? A, foreign keys are used in fact tables to link to dimension tables, not within the dimension table itself to track history. B, a natural key is the original identifier from the source system, which already exists in the source and cannot uniquely identify multiple historical versions.
You have a fabric tenant. You plan to create a data pipeline named Pipeline 1. Pipeline 1 will include 2 activities that will execute in sequence. You need to ensure that a failure of the first activity will not block the second activity. Which conditional path should you configure between the first activity and the second activity? The options are: Option A, upon failure. Option B, upon completion. Option C, upon skip. Option D, upon skip.
To arrive at the correct answer, we focus on the keywords, execute in sequence, failure of the first activity will not block the second activity, conditional path.
The correct answer is Option B, upon completion.
Why is this correct? B, upon completion runs the second activity regardless of whether the first activity succeeds or fails, ensuring that a failure of the first activity does not block the execution of the second. Why are the others incorrect? A, upon failure only triggers the second activity if the first activity fails. If the first activity succeeds, the second activity will be blocked, which does not satisfy the requirement. C, upon skip only triggers the second activity if the first activity is skipped. If the first activity runs and fails, the second activity will be blocked. D, upon skip is a duplicate option and is incorrect because it only triggers the second activity if the first is skipped, blocking execution if the first activity fails.
You have a Microsoft Power BI semantic model. You need to identify any surrogate key columns in the model that have the summarize by property set to a value other than to none. The solution must minimize effort. What should you use? The options are: Option A, DAX formatter in DAX Studio. Option B, Model Explorer in Microsoft Power BI Desktop. Option C, Model View in Microsoft Power BI Desktop. Option D, Best Practice Analyzer in Tabular Editor.
To arrive at the correct answer, we focus on the keywords, surrogate key columns, summarize by property, minimize effort, identify.
The correct answer is Option D, Best Practice Analyzer in Tabular Editor.
Why is this correct? D, the Best Practice Analyzer in Tabular Editor can run automated rules against the model's metadata to instantly identify all surrogate key columns with incorrect summarization settings, minimizing manual effort. Why are the others incorrect? A. DAX Formatter in DAX Studio is designed to format DAX queries and expressions for readability, not to analyze model metadata or column properties. B. Model Explorer in Power BI Desktop displays the semantic model structure but lacks automated rule-based scanning to quickly find specific property misconfigurations. C. Model View in Power BI Desktop requires manually checking the properties of every column individually, which is highly inefficient and does not minimize effort.
You have a Fabric tenant that contains a semantic model. The model contains 15 tables. You need to programmatically change each column that ends in the word key to meet the following requirements: hide the column, set nullable to false, set summarize by to none, set available in MDX to false, mark the column as a key column. What should you use? The options are: Option A, Microsoft Power BI Desktop. Option B, ALM Toolkit. Option C, Tabular Editor. Option D, DAX Studio.
To arrive at the correct answer, we focus on the keywords, programmatically change, semantic model, bulk property updates.
Correct answer is option C, Tabular Editor.
Why is this correct? C. Tabular Editor features advanced scripting, using C#, which allows you to programmatically iterate through tables and columns to apply bulk property changes efficiently. Why are the others incorrect? A. Microsoft Power BI Desktop requires manual property updates through the graphical interface and does not support programmatic scripting for bulk modifications. B. ALM Toolkit is designed for semantic model schema comparison and metadata deployment, not for writing scripts to alter model structural properties. D. DAX Studio is built for authoring, analyzing, and tuning DAX queries, lacking the capability to programmatically modify the properties of semantic models.